Microplastics have been discovered in a shocking place in our bodies.
Back with a new study that has some scientists raising concerns about our environmental health and its impacts on the human body. Over the years, microplastics, a word you probably started to hear more, they've been found in almost every organ in the body, as well as in the bloodstream. But now, for what seems to be the first time, these microscopic pollutants have been found in tissue in the human brain. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar is here to explain what this new research means. This is one of those ones where you're like, I'm worried about it, don't think I can do anything about it, but you're going to tell me if I can. So let's first start with the information. It's a new study. It found microplastics.
Microplastics. They're in our oceans, our food, our water. And now, believe it or not, they're making their way into our brains. Yeah, it sounds like science fiction, but recent studies have confirmed that microplastics are actually getting into brain tissue. This is not just some distant environmental issue anymore. It's happening inside our bodies. So let's break down how this happens, why it's happening, and what it could mean for our health in the long run. First off, let's take a step back and talk about what microplastics even are. Microplastics are tiny particles, smaller than 5 millimeters in size, that come from the breakdown of larger plastic products like bottles, bags, and packaging. They're also produced intentionally in some products like exfoliating scrubs or toothpaste. Because these particles are so small, they can travel almost anywhere. We've been aware for a while that they're contaminating our water supply and even making their way into the food chain. But the idea that they're getting into human tissue, especially brain tissue, is a whole new level of alarming. So, how did this become a concern? Well, there have been several recent studies showing that microplastics have been found in human blood and lung tissue. And now, the latest research is revealing that these tiny particles can cross the blood-brain barrier. That's a critical discovery because the blood-brain barrier is like this security system that protects our brains from harmful substances in the bloodstream. It's designed to keep out toxins, pathogens, and other foreign invaders, so the fact that microplastics are getting through is really concerning. Now, you're probably wondering, how exactly are microplastics getting into our brains? The research suggests that we're ingesting or inhaling them, and from there, these particles can enter the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, they're able to bypass the blood-brain barrier, possibly through mechanisms we don't fully understand yet. But the takeaway here is clear. These particles are not only entering our bodies, but also reaching some of the most sensitive and protected tissues, like our brains. What makes this even more concerning is the fact that we don't yet fully understand the long-term effects of microplastics on brain health. Sure, we know that plastics can contain harmful chemicals like BPA, phthalates, and other additives that are known to disrupt hormones and cause inflammation. But the idea that these tiny particles could accumulate in brain tissue, that's terrifying because inflammation in the brain can lead to a whole host of issues, including neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. One of the most shocking aspects of this research is that it's not just theoretical anymore. In laboratory settings, scientists have been able to observe microplastics penetrating brain tissue in animals. In one particular study, researchers injected microplastics into mice and found that the particles crossed the blood-brain barrier and accumulated in brain cells. They saw changes in the mice's behavior and cognitive function, like memory impairment and increased anxiety. And while these were animal studies, the implications for humans are pretty clear. If microplastics can cause neurological issues in animals, there's a good chance they're doing something similar in us. Now, it's important to remember that research is still in the early stages. We don't have all the answers yet. But the fact that we're even having this conversation, that microplastics are being detected in human brain tissue, means it's time to take this seriously. So, what does this mean for our health going forward? Honestly, that's the big question. Some scientists are worried that microplastics could trigger chronic inflammation in the brain, which is a key factor in many neurological disorders. Others are concerned about the potential for these particles to interfere with brain development. especially in children, whose brains are still growing and more vulnerable to toxins. We're talking about long-term effects that could take years to fully manifest, so this is something we're going to need to study closely over time. Another point that's worth mentioning is that microplastics may not be acting alone. These particles can carry other toxins with them. Think about it. Plastic in the environment absorbs all sorts of chemicals and pollutants. So when microplastics get into your body, they could be delivering a cocktail of other harmful substances right along with them. This could amplify the negative effects, making it even harder for scientists to pinpoint exactly what's causing damage. The million-dollar question here is, what can we do about it? Unfortunately, it's not like we can just stop breathing or eating, right? Microplastics are already everywhere. They're in the air, in our water, and in nearly all the food we consume. But that doesn't mean we should just throw our hands up and say, oh well. There are definitely steps we can take to limit our exposure. For starters, we need to seriously rethink our relationship with plastic. This means cutting down on single-use plastics as much as possible. Things like plastic water bottles, straws, and packaging. These are the primary sources of microplastics in our environment. More importantly, we need to push for stricter regulations on plastic production and waste management. Recycling programs aren't enough because not all plastics can be recycled, and much of what we think is getting recycled is actually ending up in landfills or the ocean. On an individual level, there are also ways to minimize your exposure to microplastics. Using filtered water, avoiding plastic food containers, especially when heating food, and steering clear of products with microbeads are all good places to start. We can also be more mindful about the clothes we wear. Did you know that synthetic fabrics like polyester shed microplastics every time you wash them? Investing in natural fabrics or using filters in your washing machine can help cut down on this. But let's be real here. This isn't something we can solve through personal choices alone. We need systemic change. Governments and industries need to step up and regulate the production of plastic and come up with better ways to manage plastic waste. If we don't, we're going to continue seeing microplastics show up in more places they don't belong, like our brains. I know this all sounds really alarming, and it is, but the fact that we're aware of this issue is a step in the right direction. Science is moving fast, and while it's scary that microplastics are making their way into places like the brain, it also means researchers are on it. The more we learn, the better equipped we'll be to deal with this growing problem. So what's next? Well, expect to hear a lot more about microplastics in the coming years. This research is just the beginning, and scientists are already looking into how these particles are affecting not just the brain, but other organs as well. We could be on the verge of some groundbreaking discoveries that will change how we think about plastic and its impact on our bodies and the environment. In the meantime, the best thing we can do is stay informed and push for change. This issue isn't going away, but the more we know, the better we can protect ourselves and future generations. The brain is one of the most vital organs we have, and the last thing we want is for it to become a dumping ground for microplastics. The takeaway here is simple. Microplastics are in our bodies, and they're getting into places we never imagined, like the brain. This isn't just an environmental problem anymore, it's a human health issue. We have to take action, whether that's cutting down on plastic use, advocating for stricter regulations, or supporting research into how to mitigate the effects of microplastic exposure. Our brains and our health depend on it.